Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us here today. Every time I do this introduction, Matt and Josh always grab their mugs of coffee and drink to hide their laughing at me all the time. But I'm so happy you're joining us today. I'm Father Daniele. Joining me, like I said, are the two people that we've been journeying, I think, with Joseph over the last 30 days. Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan. Welcome to you guys.
Hello. Thank you.
Feast of St. Joseph on Friday.
Yeah.
Many people did the consecration to St. Joseph.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys did the consecration or not, but it was phenomenal to celebrate that feast day on last Friday, because I was doing the consecration to St. Joseph, and it was really stunning. To learn about St. Joseph, to journey with him,
and think about him in a different light.
Yes, and every day honestly, since the days have passed, since the feast day, I'm like, I feel like I need to read about St. Joseph more, right? Because I just had that habit for 33 days.
Yeah.
You know, it was really beautiful. And some of the cool stories that came from the stories of St. Joseph were, I had no idea about two miracles. And apparently one is a movie, right? Yeah. One is that the actual house of the Holy Family moved. Yeah. Like, the people woke up one day and the house was gone. And it moved from somewhere in the Middle East to Croatia.
Yeah. And
then moved from Croatia to a town in Loreto,
in Italy. Yeah.
And they've done measurements of the house.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. It's made with the same materials, not even available in Croatia or Italy.
The clay from the Middle East.
The clay from the Middle East is there. Like, this house just
disappeared and then showed up.
And showed up somewhere else. Like, I didn't know that. Of course, I'm giving you the Coles Notes version. If people still use Coles Note anymore, I don't think so.
I think the older generation understands what it is.
Yeah.
I think people actually have the internet now.
People have the internet. Yeah, exactly. But really fascinating stuff. That was number one that I was really fascinated about. Number two was, and this is, I think, where there was a movie about this.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. I've never seen the movie, didn't know about this story. There was a group of cloistered nuns who had this church, their chapel, but the church was designed in such a way where they couldn't install a stairwell to the balcony.
Yeah.
Because the space was too tight or whatever it was, right? Yeah. So they did a novena, that's a 9-day prayer to St. Joseph, asking for someone to help them build the staircase, to come up with this new idea, maybe resources to be able to make a new plan of the building, you know? And on the 9th day of the novena, the prayers to St. Joseph, this man shows up at this...
Not known to anybody.
Not known to anyone.
Stranger.
Just shows up, says, I hear you're looking for someone to help. And they were like, oh, God bless you. Thanks be to God. And this guy said, I will build this staircase myself as long as I'm allowed to work by myself. Yeah. Like, no one bugs me, sort of thing. Hey.
Yeah.
And then,
The two really cool things about that from a woodworking perspective is that no nails were used. It's a spiral staircase, and the reason that it wasn't included in the first place is that the engineer who did the original designs, after they found out that they forgot a staircase, is like, you'll never get one in that space, or that just physically doesn't work. So that no nails were used, and there's no center pillar or no center column.
Oh, so it's all physically.
So it was built step by step. The wood bent, and no nails used, and it fits perfectly in the space. And it's been analyzed from that perspective.
And the wood even that was used
isn't from that region.
Yeah. And after the stairwell was done, the man just disappeared. Like, they didn't hear from him. Didn't. They went into the town. Like, where can we thank this man? No one knew who they were talking about.
Yeah.
And so they really believe that St. Joseph came to them, built this staircase, and left.
Yeah. That's cool.
It's fascinating. Anyways, St. Joseph has become, it was always a great favorite of mine, but I'm really enamored by him all over again, you know, because it has been a cool journey. Yeah. Especially
especially that it's the year of St. Joseph.
The year of St. Joseph. We did a whole episode on that.
It's during Lent, his feast day normally falls during Lent. But that's, personally, Wednesdays and Fridays in Lent we take as kind of more penitential days. But this past week, it was the kind of the perfect combination, because St. Patrick's Day was on Wednesday, feast day. St. Joseph was on Friday. feast day. So.
I will admit, I took advantage of the opportunity on Friday to eat meat.
Yeah.
I did. I was like every meal meat. Because it was a Friday in Lent. You know, I don't know. Okay, this is off topic, but Fridays in Lent, I'm always planning my non-meat meals. Like, should I stick with the tuna?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna have this today, or you know what? I'll push that back to Friday because that's not meat.
Exactly. Okay, salmon. I haven't had. Oh, yeah. Wait till Friday. So I took advantage of the opportunity to eat meat on Friday. Okay, so let's move on. Saint Joseph, pray for us. And one thing I do want to talk about today with you guys is last week there was a bit of a commotion, I think, in the media with a certain teaching of the Catholic faith. And I think it's good to talk about that because last Monday or Tuesday, and if I may, it was quite like the Vatican to just release this statement with their normal announcements that they do, just kind of tucked in there, and then all of a sudden by like later that day, it had spread all over the media. And of course, the news I'm talking about is the Vatican clarifying, or actually it was an answer to a dubium. And a dubium is a question placed on the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the congregation that deals with matters of faith and answers the questions of what's permitted and what's not, right? So the question was, if the church has the authority to give a blessing to unions of people who are of the same sex. The short answer was no.
Yeah.
And then it gave like a response as why. So not only did the answer make headlines, but the response made headlines as well. So we're going to just kind of break that open a little bit today and try and get people to understand it more. And, because this teaching is something that a lot of people wrestle with. And not just people with same-sex attractions, right? But Catholics in general. You might have a son or daughter,
Family member or friend.
Yeah, exactly. Right, family member, friend. So this is one that a lot of people wrestle with, and I think we should just kind of break it open and see what we can do with this conversation.
I think it's important to note that this teaching hasn't changed.
Right.
Even though the media has suggested that there has been changes in the church, nothing has changed on this. All that's been done is clarified the church's position, which then a lot of times the media takes and spins one way or the other, right? But for like hundreds of years, this hasn't changed. The difference has changed society's view. And as not a lot of people now necessarily grew up with the teachings of the church or those kinds of things, or let's say a misunderstanding of the teachings of the church now, and the world is becoming, let's say, more accepting of that lifestyle, right? Like if you went back 20, 30 years ago, it was illegal still in some countries having same-sex attractions and stuff. And even today, there's still some countries that's the case. But nowadays, it's a lot more accepted in society as general. In fact, it's become the norm for those people with those attractions. But the church has never changed its teaching on this, whether it was back in Roman times when this was very prevalent, or back in the 1500s when it wasn't prevalent, and then back again to today. It's never changed those teachings. It's just clarified.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This has been a solid teaching of the Catholic Church.
It hasn't changed.
Like if we're going to go at the very basic level, marriage, the sacrament of marriage in the church is between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
Okay. We did a whole episode, I think, on that, and I always like the term about bonding, babies and bonding.
Oh, yeah.
That you use in the RCIA class. But yes, that's always been the teaching of the church. However, this week, when the teaching of the church was just clarified,
Yes,
it kind of exploded as sort of breaking news. I like what you said. Like nothing has changed. Like this was just the church sort of answering a question being brought to their attention.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it was kind of spurred on by the conversations the German bishops are having right now. And so they were just answering the question of what the church teaches. I feel as though, going about what you're saying, there was a lot of disappointment in the bishops, in the Vatican's answer to the question. And I feel as though that's sort of related to the style in which Pope Francis sort of has as the pontiff. Because many people who aren't familiar with church structure or church teaching, they see Pope Francis as this real innovator of the church.
Even the president of the church that changes things
yes, where Pope Francis has not changed any teaching of the Catholic Church, but I think for people outside of the church, he's seen as sort of someone who's changing things and bringing the church into what they would say is the new millennia or new century.
They see him as a progressive. There are a couple factors, and both of you were saying, that kind of set up this sort of disappointed expectation that the church is going to change its teaching on marriage. And then, Josh, I think you rightly said, just like the church has understood marriage as a sacrament from the beginning.
Yeah.
And we talked in a previous episode about how kind of the disparity between, what the church understands as the sacrament of marriage and what society understands as kind of a legal arrangement of marriage or kind of a civil union. Those are drifting further and further apart. So it's kind of incumbent on the church to clarify, as those things become more disparate. Like, no, this is a marriage, and this is a civil union, or this is a legal arrangement. And we spoke earlier about that for us who aren't necessarily following in this detail. Like for those of us born, after the sexual revolution, born after kind of the legal change in marriage, from everything from kind of divorce and infidelity and all those things. We've grown up in a context that like this is a progressive view of marriage. This is just kind of the next step. So people who kind of inhabit that narrative, people who are part of that kind of story of progress, they're superimposing that expectation on the church. They're superimposing that expectation on, that this is something that the church just needs to get around to. But it's also worth noting too that the church blessing a marriage, it's not just a simple kind of blessing. There's actually kind of and Father, you're probably better equipped to speak to this, but like if say you got married and then 3 or 4 years into your marriage, you became Catholic, and you were like, well, we weren't married in a Catholic church. We didn't have the Catholic sacrament of marriage. You can have a priest bless that marriage to bring it into kind of the sacramental fullness of what it initially should be, but because of circumstance, you didn't have that opportunity. That it's like actually blessing a marriage isn't just this kind of vague approval. It's an actual, recognition that the marriage stands within the context of the church.
Yeah, and on that, like I read the response that the congregation put out on this matter, and I just have a copy here in front of me. One thing that really helped me to understand it was in about the fourth or fifth paragraph. It talks about what happens when you invoke a blessing on human relationships, right? Like what you're saying, even you're not married in the Catholic Church, you become Catholic after, the priest can bless the marriage. And that's in the fifth paragraph, it talks about the power of blessing on particular human relationships, that they're always oriented towards, it calls a blessing a sacramental, which are always orient us towards the sacrament, right? So it says, if that makes sense, if I'm not making sense, please stop me.
Yeah.
But it says, therefore, only these realities which are in themselves ordered to serve the ends, which is the sacrament, are congruent with the essence of the blessing imparted by the church. That really helped me to be able to talk about it with people this week.
Yeah.
Because basically what the Vatican is saying is, it's not, people think, like, what's the big deal? Just bless, but it's not congruent with the end situation. It's not congruent with where marriage is, in the sacrament of marriage is, right? So to impart a blessing on two people of the same sex who are, gathering together in a union, doesn't make sense because it's not leading to the sacrament of marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that's where it's saying it's always congruent to the end. It always ends with the sacrament.
That makes sense. And realizing that the church isn't where. So when we come to government and we're talking about marriage and we're talking about this and that and the other, the government is of the people, for the people, or should be, right? Is roughly the idea. But the church isn't. The church isn't of the people, for the people.
Right.
The church doesn't. So whereas in political structure or laws of the land will change based on what people want it to change as. So if people are supporting that, or let's say we really want to have white barn owl hunting season, or whatever the case may be, we could if the whole world, all of Canada or all of Ontario felt that way, we could open that up and we could vote on it and make it something and make it legal to hunt white barn owls. But the church's teaching has nothing to do with what the rest of popular belief is, or what people want to see happen. It is led by the Holy Spirit, led by God. And so we can't just say, okay, this is going to change because people want it to change. Does that make sense? I think that's something to remember, that it's not necessarily by popular belief or by popular vote that things change. It is by understanding and God's will.
Yeah, and that's something that the church kind of teaches with every sort of area of like not just in talking about marriage, but like look how many people don't even believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist.
Exactly.
Or like even Catholics.
Yeah.
So it's because most people think it's a symbol.
So it must be a symbol.
We're just going to reduce it to a symbol, just to make people understand it better.
Yeah.
Like all these different areas. Like even you think of someone, you think of euthanasia. People say, well, think of the suffering people go with, and then you think like, okay, because people say people shouldn't have to suffer, we'll allow people to take their own life. Like so, we could make that argument with everything that. Yeah, it's not popular opinion.
Bringing it back to the Catholic faith, there was when we'll talk about this in another episode, but when contraception came out, it was thought to be one of these great things. A lot of the Christian churches dropped what they were teaching on contraception at the time because it seemed to be the answer to what the world was looking for and everything else. But Pope
Paul VI.
Thank you. Paul VI came out and made a statement, and the whole world kind of, like today, was shocked by what are you saying? This doesn't make sense. This, and he predicted that certain things would happen. If you go through it, I mean, his predictions were right on. But the church doesn't change just because of popular belief or by popular understanding, right? Like it is based off of a truth, and that truth isn't necessarily based off of popular belief.
I was just going to say, I think that's a good example, because what we're really talking about, like, and sorry to bring it into kind of philosophical language, but like the church's understanding of law is teleological, that actions are ordered towards ends, and they're ordered towards proper ends, that humans have a nature, humans have human nature, and that order, that nature is ordained by God, and so all of our actions should be ordered towards those ends. And like that's pretty philosophical, but you kind of contrasted that with kind of a positivistic legal positivism, that it's something that can change over time. So talking about this kind of narrative, this expectation that's building, that the church is just like the world, but a couple decades behind. That this is something that's going to change. They're just late to the table. Yeah. Pope Paul VI in Humanae Vitae is a really good example of that, because the justification for saying that use of contraception was objectively disordered, not ordered towards the ends of what human sexuality should be ordered towards, was a real disappointment for those who were saying, okay, well, no, this is just the next step. Right. So that's pretty analogous to kind of what we're talking about now, is that the justification for these things is that, no, sexuality within marriage is ordered towards pretty specific ends, and those are kind of...
babies and bonding.
Yes, yeah.
I think too, when you're thinking about that, you have to understand, taking it away from, when we're talking, a lot of times people, the media specifically likes to target the church against homosexuality. And what's kind of happened in the past is that Pope Francis has actually stood up and tried to clarify things, but then the media takes that and pretends like he's swinging a whole different way than what the church has taught in the past. But what he's really saying is, no, like the church has stood up and has said, no, like the person is a person first. And realizing that sexuality is not the whole being of a person. Even though I think today, especially when we're talking about sex cells, the world likes to push that you as a human, because we don't necessarily push you as a child of God, or you as, you first are a sexual being, and that's kind of the push of the world on society. I mean, a media, let's say, on society. But the church pushes back. No, sexuality is a very small part of humanity. And even so, like if you look at our priests and our religious lives, they actually take a vow of celibacy, taking away that part, not taking away, but giving that back to God, fully to God. And so showing that you don't need to have an active sexual life, to be fully human, to be fully a person, to be fully a man, to be fully a woman, to be fully, like, sexuality is a great gift from God, but it's one small part of what makes you human. And what I think a lot of times we degrade ourselves into is saying that sexuality is all that I'm about. And I'm not just saying this when it comes to a homosexuality or whatever. I'm saying this across the world.
Sure.
I worked many blue-collar jobs where I worked with people, and they're 9 to 5, like we worked together from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. And then their whole thing was, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go to the bar, I'm going to try to get laid, and then I'm going to wake up and I'm going to do it all over again. I'm going to work 12 hours, go home, try to get, go to the bar, try to get laid, do it all. That was their life. And so when we degrade human nature to only being about sexuality, we're missing a crucial part of who God created us to be. So let's take that away. What the church does is says, okay, God gave us great pleasurable things in life. I love my eating, but eating is meant for a purpose. And when you take away that purpose, so eating is meant to keep your body going and have energy and all that stuff. But when you take away that purpose, either you stop eating, like anorexia, or you're not taking that stuff in, or you eat too much, there can be sin involved there, or there can be, you're not using it for the purpose it was created for. And because of that, there's a distortion. And so then we have to look at what's going on there. Gluttony being that sin, or the other, right? You can then willingly give up food, give up the pleasure of food, and fast. But fasting past a certain point, without spiritual direction, without all that stuff, can be a sin, right? Like if you're just not eating, well, that you could be anorexic. Why are you not eating? And that's why fasting beyond a certain point has to be done under spiritual guidance, I believe, what the church suggests, right? That you should be doing that. But the same thing when it comes to sleeping. Sleeping, we need it. We all need it. You'll die without sleep. We figured that out through unfortunate circumstances before. But if you take sleep and then you do too much of it, if all you're doing is sleep, then we have to look, okay, there's something going on here. And now we're talking about sloth or laziness or something. You know what I mean? So taking the purpose out of the action. Are humans all about sleep? Absolutely not. That's a small, very small part. Are humans about eating? Absolutely not. That's a couple hours of our day, but it's not a huge part of our day. And we incorporate eating into other aspects, family, community, all that stuff. Sexuality, it is a small part of who we are and who we're called to be. Does that make sense? I'm going on, I know, but
Yes, I followed you there in the end.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you did make a good point. I agree.
Yeah, and I would just say that that celibacy, talking about, is kind of foreign to any of us who grew up kind of post sexual revolution.
Yeah.
That it's like that celibacy is something that's imposed on you, or it's just like people who have a negative view from outside the church, that it's like, okay, well, priests have to be celibate. But without really looking at the possibility that celibacy can be a virtue. Mm-hmm. And just bringing it back to, we're talking about Saint Joseph, that if we believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, which by extension means that Joseph was celibate for his entire life, and we hold him up as kind of the the model of virtue within marriage. He's most known as the spouse of the Blessed Virgin. Yeah. That it's if he's our model for us specifically as men, but also kind of a model for anyone who kind of wants to be married, which is the kind of context of our discussion, that he chose celibacy, and that was it wasn't a negative thing for him. It allowed him to fulfill kind of his vocation. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to say some positive things that were received, I guess, maybe by the Vatican statement from the CDF, and maybe some real negative stuff. So the first positive that I want to say is the church does, when it releases these documents, does make a distinction. And in this document, it does say, this doesn't mean this doesn't mean that people with same-sex attraction are any less than anyone else.
Of course not.
It clarifies that.
Yeah,
It
did a good job that way.
reiterates that. It says, and that doesn't mean that because a union between two people of the same sex can't be blessed, doesn't mean that people with same-sex attraction can't be blessed. Like, it makes those distinctions, which people here in the Western world might say are very minor and maybe pitiful. Like, oh, great, I'm glad they said that before they say that they can't. But remember, the church is a universal church.
Yeah.
There are areas outside of the Western world where this news of the Vatican saying,
is forbidden.
Yeah. Like this news of the Vatican saying that homosexual people are worth and deserving of respect and dignity to be treated with undue discrimination.
Yeah.
Like that's not taken lightly in some parts of the world where the Vatican is saying this, right? So we might see that and just take it for granted because that's the world we live in. Of course, we believe that people with same-sex attraction should not be treated any less, right? So that would be a positive thing that I think that came from this. Now, what made the headlines?
Yeah.
And what was probably the most shocking wording that came from this document was, and this is where I saw it in CTV News, CBC News,
all over the place.
The
I know, I saw it too.
Says Vatican says priests cannot bless same-sex unions because, quote,
it's a sin.
God cannot bless sin.
Yeah.
So that, of course, fired everyone up. Like, oh, and so that was the wording they used.
Yeah.
Right. That was the wording the media picked up on, where people are really upset.
It's like one of the last lines in the whole document.
And it's,
too, right?
I know. and to be honest with you, as I'm reading along, I'm like, oh, okay,
this is good.
Okay.
This is good. Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Because I think that I could understand.
Yeah.
Where if people were offended by that. By that comment, I totally could understand. What are we trying to say here?
Basically, the understanding, though, the reason why people would take offense to it, and I understand what you're saying, because why people would be, because it would be like the church. Now, let's just use me. I'm big. It's not you can't hide that on camera. I like my food. But if it said that people that are obese are sinners, if it said that, people would be offended by that, right? Because people who have eaten more than they need to, or whatever else, are sinners. Or we can't bless the hot dog eating contest, or whatever the case may be, because it promotes gluttony or whatever. So understanding that people can get offended by it, 100%.
Yeah.
But take that out of context. What they're saying here is not necessarily that they can't, they can bless the person. The worth of the person, as you mentioned before, everything about the person is not. If the person has same-sex attractions, but the act of homosexuality isn't there, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's the act of homosexuality. When you talk about the act of homosexuality, why? Is because why does the church distinguish that? Because the act of homosexuality is taking the pleasure from sex, but not having the babies or bonding necessarily attached to it.
And the same for heterosexual sex
100%
outside of the
marriage.
So really, we're talking about the sex acts outside of the marriage.
Baby and bonding, yeah.
Right. And the same could even be said with extramarital sex. Like
exactly.
Two people in a committed married relationship who are having sex with people that aren't their spouse, people who are having sex outside of marriage. Yes, it's not.
The church is not saying homosexuality. They are, but they're not saying specifically. It can all be only exclusively. Yes. If a man and a woman want to get together, they can do so under any circumstances. But a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, cannot.
Right.
What they're saying is it can only be done in this context, which is for babies and bonding. If you want, I'm just using that as a brief term, but
and I think about sorry, Matt. I think about Catholics. There are Catholics who are. Who have same-sex attraction, who try and live their life of faith as best as they can.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know, because I hear it from them, they feel like the church is always sort of exclusively picking on homosexual acts, right? And because we don't often, or it seems like we don't often talk about the sin of premarital sex or extramarital sex, and which may be true in some cases,
Agreed.
right?
Yeah.
Because while the church teaches that homosexual persons should be afforded respect and dignity, not all Catholics afford them that, right? And it reflects poorly on the entire church. That is not what the church wants. That is not what God wants for his church or for his people. And there is to be perceived that the church picks exclusively on homosexual acts. There might be some truth to that because they sense it all the time, right? Whereas the church could do a better job of, in high schools and college universities talking about premarital sex. These things don't make headlines, though. When we're talking about premarital sex, they don't make headlines. The church's teaching on that does not make headlines, right? So it does have that unbalance of where it seems like we are a little bit unfair, but in some cases we are.
The popes have spoken about premarital sex, and you know what I mean.
It's a fundamental teaching of our
exactly, and they talked about even the Synod of Family that happened recently and stuff.
Yes.
They talked and clarified some of the things around around sex in marriage and stuff, but that never made headlines, right?
And when I was going to say, when the conversation stays at the level of the headlines, you don't have the opportunity to make these kind of nuanced distinctions or clarifications that, and people really pick up on specific language. So when people want to say, it's objectively disordered actions, that it's all of the things that you've been describing, the catechism, because that's the language the catechism uses, and it sounds pretty rough, but objectively disordered means that it's not working towards the natural order ordained by God.
You were saying,
all of those,
what's another example of this?
Beyond kind of what we would classify as sexual sins, there's lying is objectively disordered.
Exactly. So
calumny is objectively disordered. Blasphemy is objectively disordered and on a level, or identified as a much higher level of. So this is the language that the Catechism uses for anything that is outside of the natural order established by God.
But
Yeah,
I don't know. It'd be kind of funny to have it on the newspaper. Someone the church says is using Jesus' name in vain is
objectively disordered.
Exactly, objectively disordered,
which it is. That is
exactly. But it would never make headlines, right?
Of course, it would never make headlines. Of course, it never. And think of how many people actually use the Lord's name in vain all the time. I hear it all the time. It's really distressing. But that is objectively disordered. Yeah, for sure. We were just kind of getting hot there, and then we have to go. We're out of time. But this was a good conversation, and I really hope that we kind of unpacked this topic a little bit, where people aren't. I like what you said, Matt. Maybe that's a good way to end. Is oftentimes we understand our faith in terms of headlines. There's something deeper than the headlines. That I think we need to come to understand. It's a struggle. Not all of us will agree with all of the church's teaching. But we are called to go to look deeper into them, to pray about them, to ask the Holy Spirit to really reveal to us why does the church teach this. Help me to understand this more. And I think the more time we give the Holy Spirit to really work in our life, the more we really see how God has ordained sort of the world and the teachings of his church, right? So we have to go deeper than a headline. But I think we can all agree here in this conversation that members of the homosexual community shouldn't feel that they are always pushed aside by the church.
Not.
They may feel that way.
Yeah.
And we recognize that.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't.
No.
And not that they shouldn't. Maybe we should do a better job of welcoming them. But there is a way to welcome them. Just like, there's a way to welcome other people who feel disenfranchised with the church as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe that's a good way to end. Hey, thanks for talking about this.
It's a fun topic in 30 minutes.
And we could have gone a whole other 30 minutes talking about
this. This is the start of this conversation.
Yeah, this is the start. And hopefully we could shine a little bit more light going forward. So if you have any questions, comments, clarifications, or hateful comments for Matt, you can send them to the Catholic Buzz Podcast at gmail.com. Okay? For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milgen, I'm Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.